Welcome to Crime Secrets, the channel where real investigations and shocking true crime stories are brought to life. Today we're uncovering a case that stunned the nation and pushed investigators into one of their most intense searches ever. A student vanished straight out of her own home in the dead of night, leaving behind a scene so strange it shook everyone who knew her. The police rushed into action, and the deeper they looked, the darker the truth became. Step by step, investigators uncovered a chain of events so shocking that it stunned people across the entire country. Eve Carson was born on November 19, 1985, in Athens, Georgia. And from day one, she carried a fire inside her that set her apart. Even as a young girl, she moved through life with intention and ambition, acting like she already knew she was meant for something bigger. Teachers and friends all noticed that Eve didn't just participate, she led with purpose. Throughout high school, Eve wasn't just busy, she was everywhere and pushing boundaries every single day. She served as vice president of the student council, volunteered at a nursing home, supported a shelter for abuse survivors, worked as a congressional page, and even helped in a stem cell research lab, all while juggling school duties like it was nothing. Her drive felt unreal, like she had an endless engine pushing her forward. After graduating with honors, Eve attended the University of North Carolina, where she chose not one, but two demanding majors, political science and biology. She crushed every academic challenge thrown her way, earning a prestigious scholarship and becoming one of the brightest faces on campus. Her leadership was impossible to ignore, and she quickly stepped into major roles that made her the go-to person in several student organizations. Eve didn't just focus on herself, she kept pouring into the world around her. She taught science to elementary school kids, signed up for volunteer missions, and traveled across the globe to help others. One summer, she assisted doctors in Ecuador. Another semester, she studied in Cuba, and she even joined a research team in Egypt. Everywhere she went, she showed the same unstoppable work ethic and heart for helping people. There was no question Eve was one of the most impressive students the university had ever seen. She had dreams stacked high and was moving toward them faster than most people her age could imagine. She had already secured a job with a major company and was preparing to launch her career right after graduation. In February, at just 22 years old and deep into her final year of college, Eve lived in an off-campus house with a tight group of friends. On the night of March 5th, around 1:30 a.m., her roommates got ready to head to a party and asked Eve to come along. She kindly turned them down, choosing to stay home and prepare for her classes, something completely typical for her. Her friends left, returning around 4:30 in the morning, and that's when everything shifted. The moment they stepped inside, they felt a strange tension in the air. The front door was standing wide open, the house lights were still on, and Eve was nowhere in sight. Not her belongings, not even her car. It didn't feel like she simply stepped out for a moment. It felt like she vanished, called her again and again, but her phone stayed silent. At first, they tried to convince themselves that maybe something urgent came up and she had to leave quickly. But the longer the silence stretched, the worse the feeling grew. By the following day, with Eve still missing, her friend finally picked up the phone and contacted the police. Investigators listened carefully, and then they shared information that made the room feel even colder. Earlier that same morning, officers found the body of an unidentified young woman, and they needed someone to confirm who she was. When they showed a photo to Eve's friend, the reaction was immediate and heartbreaking. It was Eve. Around 5 a.m. Just shortly after she disappeared, a woman living about a mile from Eve's home reported something terrifying to the police. She had been jolted awake by the sharp crack of gunshots, followed by a scream so chilling it froze her in place. Terrified and unsure if danger was right outside her window, she grabbed her phone and immediately called the authorities. When officers arrived, they found a young woman lying on the ground with nothing. No ID, no phone, no belongings, just a body left in the dark with multiple gunshot wounds. Once Eve's friend confirmed it was her, detectives gathered her roommates and started piecing together a timeline to make sense of the chaos. At 1:30 a.m., Eve was home studying like any other night. But by 5 a.m., she was found a mile away with no sign of how she got there. With her car missing, investigators immediately leaned toward robbery, trying to understand if this was a simple theft or something far more calculated. That theory grew stronger when detectives searched her room and discovered her wallet and credit cards were gone, completely missing from the house and nowhere near the crime scene. Medical examiners later confirmed there were no signs of sexual assault, allowing investigators to rule that motive out early on. When they checked her phone records, the last signal popped up near a highway outside town. But the phone itself never surfaced, making detectives believe the killer tossed it into the woods to hide their tracks. Then came the first big breakthrough. A car matching Eve S. was found abandoned just a few miles from her home, sitting in a quiet spot with no driver in sight. Authorities wasted no time, and it towed straight to forensics for a deep dive. Fingerprints, DNA, anything that could point to a suspect. As investigators kept searching, another crucial discovery came to light. Forensic experts dug into Eve's computer, the same one she'd been using to study, found activity logged until about 3:30 a.m., meaning she was still inside the house for at least 2 hours after her friends left. Only sometime after that window did she leave willingly or by force and end up at the spot where she was later found. By this point, news of Eve's murder had spread across the entire city, sending a shockwave through the college campus and beyond. She wasn't just another student, she was a leader, a familiar face, someone everyone respected and admired. Her sudden loss crushed the community, and with that heartbreak came a rising sense of fear. People began locking their doors earlier, checking over their shoulders, worrying that whoever did this might strike again. With no solid leads publicly revealed and no suspect in custody, anxiety kept growing, and the community was left wondering whether danger was still hiding somewhere among them. As investigators kept digging, the pressure around the case exploded, and detectives suddenly found themselves buried in tips from every direction. Students were reporting anything that even felt slightly suspicious, hoping they might help crack the mystery wide open. But even with all the noise, none of the information pushed the investigation forward until something big finally broke loose. Since detectives believed the killer had taken Eve's credit cards, they pulled up her transaction history, and what they discovered changed the whole direction of the case. Just 18 minutes after Eve's computer activity stopped, someone withdrew $700 from her account through 2 separate ATM transactions. When they tried taking more, the bank blocked it because of the daily limit. The ATM used was on the opposite side of town near a shopping center, far from Eve's home. Detectives wasted no time getting the surveillance footage, and when they viewed it, the entire room shifted. On the screen, they saw a man casually sitting inside Eve's car using her card like it was his own. In the back seat, there was a blurry figure, and investigators wondered if it might have been Eve herself. But the video quality was too low to confirm anything with confidence. Forensic experts tried enhancing the image, hoping to pull out a clearer look at the passengers. But no matter how much they worked on it, the footage refused to reveal more detail. Meanwhile, police learned that the same suspect kept trying to use Eve's card at different ATMs across the city, hitting machine after machine, and most of them had no cameras. This pattern went on until March 7th, when another alert lit up investigators' screens around 12:30 a.m. This time, the suspect walked into a 24-hour convenience store and tried using the ATM again, but the transaction got denied. Officers rushed straight to the store in the neighboring town, hoping this location had cameras, and luckily it did. When they reviewed the tape, they saw someone attempting to use Eve's card. But in a shocking twist, it wasn't the same man from the first ATM video. Suddenly, detectives were forced to rethink everything. Was this a team effort? Was the killer working with someone else? Or had the killer passed the card to another person to cover their tracks? They tried running the second suspect through databases, but once again the grainy footage blocked any clean identification. With nowhere else to turn, detectives released both surveillance images to the public, hoping someone would finally recognize the faces. The case had already shaken the entire community, so the police station was quickly flooded with even more calls. But just like before, none of these tips brought investigators closer to catching the person responsible for Eve's death. Then, everything shifted on March 12th, when an anonymous caller reached out with a name that sent detectives straight back into motion. The caller said they recognized the man from the convenience store footage and identified him as Demario Atwater. Detectives immediately dug into Atwater's background. What they found painted a picture of someone who had been wrapped up in crime for years. Even though he was only 21, he already had a long record, including robberies, assaults, drug charges, and more. He had been in and out of jail, sometimes getting released early, and always finding himself back in trouble again. Investigators also discovered something chilling. Just 2 days after Eve's murder, Demario was supposed to appear in court for carrying a handgun while still on probation. When authorities pulled up at Waters' older mugshots and compared them to the convenience store footage, the resemblance was undeniable. Even with the grainy video, the match was too strong to ignore, and detectives knew they were finally staring at the right suspect. Further investigation revealed that DeMario lived close to the convenience store, which pushed detectives to move in fast and head straight to his residence. During questioning, DeMario denied every accusation and tried distancing himself from anything tied to the murder. But the surveillance video was too strong, giving authorities enough reason to take him into custody right on the spot. As detectives dug deeper, another name surfaced, a teenager named Lawrence Lovett, who, despite his young age, already had a criminal record and a reputation police were very familiar with. When investigators compared Lawrence's mugshots to the ATM footage, they recognized him immediately as the person behind the wheel of Eve's car in the first video. But unlike DeMario, Lawrence refused to surrender peacefully, barricading himself inside his home and forcing officers to call in SWAT to bring him out safely. Once SWAT moved in and officers got him into custody, Lawrence also denied any connection to Eve's murder, claiming he had nothing to do with it, with both suspects refusing to cooperate. Investigators charged them and held them in custody while preparing for a long, complicated court battle ahead. Since both refused to talk, detectives shifted their focus toward hard evidence, and that S when cell phone data started telling the real story. Records showed that on the night of Eve's murder, both suspects' phones connected to a tower near her neighborhood, even though they lived in a different city entirely. That was a major red flag, and detectives began forming a theory about what really happened that night. Investigators now suspect that DeMario and Lawrence weren't targeting Eve specifically. They were just out looking for someone alone and vulnerable, hoping to make fast money. From the pattern of ATM withdrawals and her missing car, detectives believe the suspects forced Eve to drive with them to multiple locations, making her hand over her card and PIN. When they hit the $700 daily limit, detectives think the suspects drove her to a wooded area on the edge of town, where the situation turned deadly and Eve lost her life in a brutal final moment. Because of the severity of the crime, prosecutors announced that they intended to pursue the death penalty against DeMario, given his age and criminal history. Lawrence's case, however, was more complicated due to him being legally underage, meaning the harshest sentence he could receive was life in prison without parole. But prosecutors knew they needed more than just phone data to lock down a conviction. So they made a strategic move. They offered DeMario a plea deal. Plead guilty, and the death penalty would be taken off the table. Realizing how high the stakes were, DeMario accepted the deal and finally broke his silence. He confessed that he and Lawrence left home that night planning to find someone to rob, hoping for quick cash. According to his statement, Lawrence called him and suggested they look around the university area where students often stayed up late. While cruising through a nearby neighborhood, they spotted Eve through her window, studying alone, and decided to act right then and there. Armed with guns, they entered the home, forced her into her own car, and drove her around to multiple ATMs trying to pull out as much money as possible. Throughout the terrifying ordeal, Eve begged them to let her go, promising she wouldn't say anything. She just wanted to go home. But in DeMario's confession, he admitted they had already made up their minds, and that promise didn't change what happened next. According to DeMario, they made the decision to kill her because she had seen their faces, even though they never once tried to hide them in the first place. He admitted they panicked, thinking she could identify them later, and instead of backing off or running, they chose the darkest option possible. They drove her to a deserted street and in a cold, calculated moment, fired multiple shots from 2 different guns. DeMario also revealed something unbelievably heartbreaking right before they killed her. Eve asked them to pray with her, reaching for even the smallest bit of humanity in that terrifying moment. But instead of showing compassion or mercy, they pulled the trigger anyway, ending her life in a way that stunned everyone who later heard the details. In April 2010, 2 years after the murder, DeMario was officially found guilty, and because of the plea deal he accepted, his life was spared from the death penalty. Instead, he received life in prison plus an additional 30 years. After the verdict, DeMario turned toward Eve's parents in court, apologized, and said he deserved the punishment handed to him, a moment that left the room heavy with emotion. Meanwhile, Lawrence refused to plead guilty, choosing instead to face trial in December 2011. His lawyer tried to argue that he wasn't responsible, but DeMario's confession, paired with the overwhelming evidence, made the decision clear. Lawrence was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison, but his journey through the justice system didn't end there. In 2013, the State Court of Appeals overturned Lawrence's sentence, citing a separate ruling stating that life without parole for juvenile offenders could be considered excessively harsh and unnecessary. With that ruling, he was granted a brand new trial, giving him another chance to speak for himself. During the retrial, Lawrence took a more vocal approach, telling the court that everyone makes mistakes and insisting he was indeed the monster people believed him to be. But even with his words, there was little true remorse in his tone, and the judge ultimately issued the same decision: life in prison. His sentence stood firm, no matter how he tried to reshape the narrative. It's also crucial to note that Lawrence had been a suspect in another chillingly similar case. In January 2008, just months before Eve's murder, a 29-year-old student was killed after someone broke into his apartment. And investigators found disturbing parallels between that crime and the one involving Eve. Even though no conviction came from that earlier case, the similarities left many wondering what might have happened if the truth had surfaced sooner. Money had been withdrawn from the victim's account at multiple ATMs across the city, showing how far the suspects traveled while forcing her to comply. Yet even with that pattern, investigators never found enough solid evidence to officially tie Lawrence to that earlier crime, and the charges were eventually dropped. Eve's case, however, became so powerful and heartbreaking that it captured national attention and pushed lawmakers to take action. In February, North Carolina legislators introduced a new law aimed at enforcing harsher penalties and tougher procedures for anyone involved in gang-related offenses. This wasn't just another bill. It was a direct response to the tragedy that struck Eve's University, a real attempt to prevent such violence from happening again. The law went into effect on December 1st and applied to every crime committed from that day forward. Eve's legacy continued to grow far beyond the courtroom. A scholarship was created in her honor, and a memorial garden was built on campus so students could reflect, remember her, and keep her spirit alive. Her impact didn't stop there. In February 2009, one of Eve's closest friends became a finalist on American Idol. And during his performance, he spoke about how her loss pushed him to take a chance on his dream. He said openly that without Eve, he never would have found the courage to step on that stage, showing just how deeply she influenced the people around her. Her kindness, her drive, her energy, all of it continued to inspire long after she was gone. If this case pulled you in and you want more stories just as intense, make sure you like the video and subscribe to the channel. We post powerful true crime breakdowns every single night, from brutal prison tales, mafia conflicts, shocking disappearances, hidden history, street legends, and even paranormal cases that will leave you thinking twice. Drop a comment below and tell us which case you want to see covered next. Your idea might be tomorrow night's episode.